So I just had the most amazing, unexpected experience that I just wanted to share a little bit about, because it gave me a perspective I didn't have even a couple hours ago when I was making these videos. I'm here in New Mexico. What brought me here was not the channel. It was my work with Rachel's Challenge. And as part of the programs that we do in a school during the day, we do a group training with about 100 students. And as part of that training, we require a lot of extra adult help, and a lot of times schools will bring in volunteers from the community. And I was walking around before we started the training, just saying hi to the volunteers and talking. And somehow, as I was talking to one of the volunteers, something came up about how I, in addition to what I do with Rachel's Challenge, I have the YouTube channel, and I was just in Lincoln making some videos. And the guy says, "Well, what do you want to know?" And I thought, I'm just being polite and saying, "Well, I did a lot of research already. I think I know pretty much everything." He goes, "Well, what about Sheriff Brady?" I said, "Well, I know he was killed by Billy the Kid and his Regulators, ambushed in Lincoln. And this guy, his name was Al, it said right there on his thing, he said, 'Well, William Brady was my great-great-grandfather. I'm Al Brady.'" And I said, "Holy cow, that's amazing." And what followed was this most just incredible conversation that I had with a connection to the history of this place. And to me, like a lot of people, I'll confess, William Brady is one tiny pawn in the story of the legend of Billy the Kid. And that's it. But that's not who he was. He was a human being who had a family, who was so much more than just this guy who was on one side of this giant gang war in Lincoln County. And so I sat down and Al and I just talked. And I said, "Tell me about your great-great-grandfather." And he started sharing with me about William Brady growing up in Ireland as a potato farmer and coming to America. In fact, I'll show you, I took a few minutes just to interview him a little bit for the channel, but then some kids came in, so we had to cut it short. But telling me how this guy was a military veteran and was so well respected by the Buffalo soldiers, the black soldiers, that because this white officer, William Brady, treated these men as equals, as so much better than most of the other white officers did, to the point where when Brady was murdered, these Buffalo soldiers were ready to come and just burn Lincoln to the ground over it all. And that, William Brady had a 13-year-old son that was Al's great-grandfather, who had to live through his father being murdered. So I learned so many more dimensions to this character in a story that so often in movies gets one-dimensionalized as the villain, and how Billy the Kid was justified in murdering this corrupt sheriff. And it wasn't nearly that simple. Nothing in history really ever is nearly that simple. But it really opened my eyes to that. Al and his wife were just wonderful people. They gave me their phone number. I'm definitely going to get back here so I can get inside of some of those places. They live in Lincoln, right across the street from where William Brady was killed. They grew up, Al did, in California, but he moved back here just a couple of years ago. And Al's the reason why there's a marker for Sheriff Brady, because even a few years ago, it wasn't there. So he was instrumental in getting that there. And just what a cool connection to history. And I'm so glad that I had that conversation with him, because I am guilty, just like a lot of other people, of compartmentalizing people like William Brady into this one-dimensional, he was on the side of the Murphys and the Dolans, he was corrupt and in their pocket. And really, he was an honorable guy who was trying to make a living, who came to America because his family was starving in Ireland, who served honorably in the United States military and found himself caught up in what was basically a gang war, where there were no good guys or bad guys. There were bad guys on both sides and there were good guys on both sides, and pretty much everybody was somewhere in between. And he was telling me how, a lot of people come to Lincoln with this idea of Billy the Kid is the hero in the story, and he wasn't. He was a murderer. None of these people were clean. None of these people were good or bad. It was complicated. It was very complicated. And I'm so glad my eyes were open to a little bit more of that story. So in the midst of making the videos today about the events of the Lincoln County War, I had a very unique opportunity to meet this fine gentleman here. This is Al Brady, and Al is actually the great-great-grandson of Sheriff William Brady. And, you know, for most people who study these events in history, William Brady is a part of the Billy the Kid story. He's a guy that got ambushed, who was on the other side from the Regulators. The Regulators ambushed him and killed him on the streets of Lincoln. But I'm so glad I got the opportunity today to talk to Al, to just have him share a little bit more. You were telling me just some of his background about in Ireland. Could you tell me a little bit more about what William Brady came from?
He came from a large family. He was the oldest son. And in Ireland, of course, they were under British rule, and there was pushback from Ireland against the British rule, but at the same time, he was involved in politics back then, trying to make a better life for his family and the people of Ireland. And he was also his family were working as potato farmers, and when the potato famine hit, that devastated the crops, and of course he ended up made the choice to leave Ireland and come to the United States and settle in the United States, where he joined the military and eventually settled here in Lincoln, New Mexico.
So he had a connection to some of the Murphy-Dolan guys from the military?
Yes.
So what was that connection?
They all served in the military together. They were all officers, actually, in the military, and they all got out of the military. He exited the military after they did. They were already settled in Lincoln, and then he settled in Lincoln because he saw the fertile land, and it was the Rio Bonito was the river that fed that whole area, and he just wanted to go back to what his roots were, and that was to be a farmer. He never really intended to be a law enforcement officer. It's just that he ran for the job to bring other income to support the agriculture. That's as a farmer, that's what he wanted to do, and that's basically what happened.
So tell me a little bit more about his family. I mean, because your great-grandfather was one of his children, was a teenager when he died. So tell me about his wife and kids. What do you know about them?
Well, from what I'm told with my uncles, is my great-grandfather, he was a very strong person. He basically kind of followed suit with my great-great-grandfather. He was strong. He had a strong hand, but he had a strong work ethic. Was a man who believed that the laws were written they were written to keep everything in order, but the law was for the bad guys who didn't want to follow the law. And back then, being that it was a territory, there was a lot of lawlessness. I mean, you had cow theft, you had horse theft. It was a common thing, and so you had it on all sides. So but when my great-grandfather was alive, from what I was told by my uncles, and my father lived with him for a short while, he was just very, very serious. And again, it's kind of hard for me to think that way, because I grew up in a family where my mother was lighthearted. My father was very quiet, but he had his serious side, and so it was kind of a mixture of both. But he was very serious, but fair-minded. Yeah.
Well, we're getting some kids that are coming in here now, so I'll probably follow up a little bit on the video and share a little bit more about what Al and I talked about. But I just thought it was important for us to remember that these aren't historic figures on a piece of paper who we just are one-dimensional. These were human beings who had families, who had lives, who had ideals and dreams and hopes and all of these things. And William Brady was no different in that. He isn't just some pawn in the Billy the Kid story. He was a real person. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Thanks, Al. I appreciate that.